I've heard a little bit of his story, and I think it will be a benefit to all of us. It is truly a story of redemption. So I ask that you are all an excellent audience, because I've seen you be an audience before. So you sit up straight, you listen carefully. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Miles Folsom.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. I hope you're open and you receive it well. I'm not the traditional type of speaker. This is not the traditional speech. So, I know a lot of times maybe it's easy to tune out, and things that seem the same. I would just hope that before we start today, you keep an open mind. Just listen, what I have to say. I have, a little bit different life experience. So with that, I think we'll start the video. Thank you.
Growing up, I never really realized the path that I was headed. Like, it's not that I couldn't have seen it, but I just never took the time out, and it never really flashed for me. My name is Miles Folsom. I'm 17 years old, and I'm incarcerated at Wabash Valley Correctional Facility. Porter Circuit Court Judge Mary Harper sentenced Folsom to 36 years behind bars. Folsom was sentenced on felony robbery and criminal confinement charges for pistol whipping and robbing an acquaintance on March 20th. He was also sentenced for burglarizing the home in the Gaslight Mobile Home Park October 30th, 2008. As a juvenile, at 16, I was immature. At 16, you just don't think right. You don't fully comprehend, all the weights that influence your life. There's so many things that are just outside of a 16-year-old's mind, and so I ended up in prison.
And the thing is that practically everyone around me was still ignorant, still doing all these things, fighting and just acting stupid, and it disgusted me to such a degree that I just pulled back from it all, and into my cell, into my little world with all my pictures and quotes, and this is my space, this is my everything, and I just sat alone and thought, and thinking, in and of itself was a new thing to me. Thinking long and thinking deeply, and putting a thought up on the blackboard of my mind and just picking it apart and having hours and hours and weeks and months to do it. This experience and receiving such a large sentence has been, I must be like the most unfortunate man in the world. If we could travel back in time and put me next to, the 16-year-old me, you might not even think we were brothers. The difference would be so drastic. I started this process sitting alone in a cell at 16, wondering why I was doing the things that I was doing and trying to understand it. And so then I just proceeded with this gigantic, criticism of who I was in my past, and trying to understand myself and my emotions, and just analyzing why I was doing these things. And a lot of it didn't make sense. And then I started thinking about my emotions. Why did I feel this way? And so by coming to understand myself, in such a complete way, I began to understand the world. I began, by understanding myself, I began to understand people and, the love of humanity and how we were all connected. And that just, I can't, it didn't open a door, it opened a world, a universe.
So with this court date only being hours away, I feel terrified. I don't know if you can really prepare for it. I sort of, there's some post within me that I grab onto, and then I hold on to it for dear life. And holding on to that immovable post helps me to get towards these things. But I mean, this hearing, I'm going to be cross-examined. My life is going to be examined. I'm going to have to go argue issues. And I don't know. I feel like I've really just been dragged to this date. I mean, no doubt I wanted to be here and to it, but I mean, it's such a scary thing. Your life is in the balance, and you really have virtually no control over it.
Dream big. Believe in yourself. Believe that you can do anything you want to. Look back at history. Anything that ever happened, you can do. You are not limited by anything but your own mind. And I would hope, standing here today, speaking this truth, you would believe it, because I have performed it. And I accept this medal for the Auditorium. And I'm afraid I accept it conditionally. I accept it not on my own behalf, but I accept it as a symbol for all the underdogs in the world, for everyone who thinks that they can't get up, that the door is shut, and that life is over. I accept it as a symbol for them, so that they may know a ray of hope in the darkness.
And they forward you on to adult prison, and you have to face adult sentences. It's not, so much like when you're a juvenile and you do something wrong, and people, your parents, counselors, maybe even your principal, they want to sit down and talk to you and help you see a better way. When you start to commit crimes, unfortunately, people aren't so friendly, as you aren't acting so friendly. And so 13 years I lived in a cell in Indiana as I tried to reform myself. And let me tell you, it was very hard. I started off on this path at a young age, unfortunately. I grew up with a father who smoked marijuana regularly. He was somewhat of an alcoholic. My father was handicapped. Before I was born, he lost his arm in a motorcycle accident, died on the cement, put a sheet over him, and came back to life. It was a miracle. But my father was never the same. And so, as a young man, I had to burden the struggles that my father also had. And still has today. My father will never recover completely. And as a child, I couldn't necessarily understand how one of my parents, how one of my heroes could be flawed. I didn't even question it. I witnessed the behaviors of my father, drinking, smoking marijuana, getting violent, and that was normal to me, unfortunately. I didn't have another home to grow up in. I didn't have other parents to look up to. I was a child stuck in these circumstances. And from there, I began to make the wrong decisions. I began to identify with other kids who smoked marijuana, who drank, particularly as a young child. I unfortunately started drugs at a very young age, probably 6 or 7 years old. The first time I was arrested was 9 years old. I was put in cuffs and I was detained at the Porter County Detention Center because myself and a friend, we had trespassed onto land that wasn't ours. And, kid curiosity kicked in. So we slipped in a fence, we broke in a building, and turns out there was a water treatment center. And there was some very dangerous chemicals there. So it was taken very seriously. So at 9 years old, I first felt cuffs and was put into a cell. And from that point, I just never seemed to get better. I had the intervention of, sure, my parents, although maybe they weren't the best communicators. I'm sure some of you have, lovely parents, but maybe they don't actually conversate with you as well as you'd like. Some parents are kind of like, they're do this and do that parents, and they're there for you always. But, we're not all the same when it comes to communication. And so my parents, they showed their love and presence by being there for me, not necessarily by being able to teach me with their words what I should and shouldn't do. so I spiraled, even with 2 parents, even living in a household. I was lucky enough to live in a house. We had a mortgage. My parents had a car, which is more than maybe some of you can say, and more than most people in the world have. But even with that, I spiraled. And the reason that I spiraled is because I felt alone. You know, once I began to make the wrong decisions, I felt as if everybody looked at me. You know, once I was pointed out, everyone's attention was on me. And immediately, I was anxious. I was afraid. I was scared. Because suddenly I was different. I was outside of the crowd, and there was something wrong with me. And well, heck, if I knew what was wrong. But all these professionals, all these other adults, you know, they told me something was wrong. And God, if I didn't want to talk to him, you know, never once in all my time in the juvenile system, from 9 years old to when I received a prison sentence at 15, did I ever find the courage to speak about why I felt the way that I felt, why I was angry, why I was hurt, who hurt me, how they hurt me. I never found that courage. And oftentimes, that's what happens when people experience something tough. You know, you may say it's a traumatic event, you know, violence of some kind, somebody being mean to you, bullying you. You know, there's this incredibly terrible thing about all of those. And I'd say even more so than the act is that once such a thing happens to you, you feel this overwhelming pressure to be silent about it, to keep it in, not to tell anybody. Maybe you feel shame. For instance, I mean, maybe somebody beats you up. Maybe somebody steals your lunch money, you know, behind your back. You don't really want to go to a friend and say, hey, man, somebody just stole my stuff. You know, your friend jokingly, they're probably going to mess with you. But, you know, I mean, that's like an example of something that goes much deeper. That when you have some sort of conflict, some sort of trauma or event, it becomes very hard to share it with other people. And if you don't share it, you end up struggling to hold it in, to repress it, to keep it secret. And when you do that, it grows in the darkness. It grows without light. It grows without the love of another person to give you advice, perspective, to say, oh, this happened to you? That's okay. So what? You're still beautiful. You're still a human being. You still have so much potential in life. Oh, well, let's go, you know, let's go do something. Don't just sit here and think about it, you know, all day in your head. When you're silent, we don't have that friend. And I didn't. Although, you know, I went to school every day. I had tons of people around me. I had people that, you know, knew my name and I said hey to. You know, I was not the most popular kid, but, you know, everybody knew me. Still, I felt as if I were alone because of the things that I was dealing with inside of me, the things that I was too afraid to bring out, to try and find a friend in. And so, my friend, unfortunately, was drugs. You know, I had sort of gained that introduction very, very early on into marijuana and alcohol, and that sort of, fortunately, eased my entry even into harder drugs. You know, one thing I never really understood as a child is that, and it was in an auditorium talk like this where, you know, I heard it. I don't know if that acronym is still relevant, but DARE to keep kids off of drugs. We used to have auditorium talks, and you know, people would come in and they would just talk about not doing drugs and why that was so important. And you know, as a kid, I really couldn't connect with it because I was a little lost, I'm not gonna lie. And one thing that they used to say that everybody made a joke of, they used to say, marijuana is a gateway drug. You know, as you sort of come up in your history classes, you may even see the campaigns, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago. It was a political thing, it was a slogan. Marijuana is the gateway to worse things. Now, as a kid, I thought that was a joke. I said, how does smoking a joint take me to shooting heroin, right? That's absurd. But I didn't realize something fundamental, which is that when you participate in a bad activity, whether it be, you know, vandalizing things, spray painting, or smoking marijuana, you often find people who have similar interests as you. And so if you want to smoke marijuana, you're going to find friends who smoke marijuana. Okay, we're still on the same level here. But one of those people, eventually, is going to smoke marijuana and do something else. And maybe, the first time you run into that, it's no problem. You're like, no, I don't do that, no problem. Next time, it's two people, and they both smoke marijuana and do something else. And so, just by simply putting yourself into that arena, to make that one choice, say, to smoke marijuana, what you do is you put yourself up against people that are much more lost, that are fighting, battling. No one does drugs for fun. I don't know, as a young kid, I didn't think that. I thought it was a party. You kind of you see social media, you see people oh, you turn 21, you go out to a club, you get drunk, woo, And I'm going to tell you, as an adult, as somebody who's been addicted to drugs, hard drugs, cocaine, I've done more than I care to mention today. It's not a party. And people don't do drugs for fun. People do drugs because they hurt inside and they need to feel better. They don't have the happiness that I now have, that hopefully most of you have. The happiness that I'm trying to share to you. It's sort of a purity, is what I'm trying to tell you, is that you don't need these things. You don't need to put yourself at risk. You don't need to put yourself in these conversations with people who are going to say, hey, you do heroin? Or you want to try this pill? And so for me, marijuana brought me into contact with those groups of people. And I don't know about you, but I didn't have, an exceptional willpower as a child. So maybe the first time that somebody offered me, cocaine, a line of coke or a pill, I can't remember the first time, but perhaps I said no. Of course I said no. Probably the second time and the third time. But eventually, just to be honest here, I said yeah. And I tried cocaine. We freebased crack off a spoon because I thought it was interesting. I thought, wow, it's a party. Why not? Next thing I know, I'm an addict. I'm 15. I haven't slept for 3 days. Somebody has stolen something from me. My mind, my emotions have just been obliterated because I stopped doing all the things that my parents and my peers wanted me to do, which was participate, continue on, living a normal life, going to school, doing your homework, keep those routines. I didn't. I threw them all away. And in throwing away those routines, that order, that goodness, I basically threw away my life, chances. And ultimately, one night came where, after finding out that an acquaintance of mine had stolen something from me, I became so offended by the act. Oh, you're going to steal from me? My stuff? My iPod? It was an iPod that he stole. I don't know if you guys know what that is anymore. I decided to set him up on a drug deal. And he showed up, and I robbed him with a handgun that I had acquired because I broke into a house trying to find money for drugs. From that incident, I was given a 36-year sentence. I was 16 years old in a courtroom when an Indiana judge told me that I would be going away for 36 years. My life vanished. Not the worst thing, right? Because what kind of life did I have? I was 15, wasn't listening to anybody, didn't care. My parents would say something, and I'd just disrespect them. They tried to tell me I couldn't go out. I would just walk out of the house because I thought I knew what was going on. I thought I was the man. But what you heard from maybe my 24-year-old self was that at 16, you just don't know all the things that are at play in your life. You don't know all the weights that are hanging in the background. They're just not there for you yet to recognize. There are so many different factors at play in your life. And so you have to be very careful about making the wrong decisions. But at the same time, this is a critical stage for all of you. I mean, you're all young adults, you're all here getting this education, you're coming into adulthood, and so you want to make these choices. And I'd say it's very important for you to make these choices. Because in a matter of, 5 years, I mean, you guys will technically be adults. Many of you will probably be living on your own, making your own choices, paying your own bills. So it's very important that you do make your own choices. But I can't stress enough that you got to try really hard to make the best choices you can. Because once you start making them for yourself, good or bad, you're going to want to keep making them. And if you start off with the wrong ones, habit says you'll continue with the wrong ones. Now, luckily for me, when I received that 36-year sentence, I didn't continue with the wrong habits. Unfortunately, that did wake me up from this sort of stupor, this cloud that I was living in. I woke up very fast because I realized that things were not a game anymore. The sort of juvenile consequences that I had been used to as a child were gone. And now I had to face the sound of the music as a grown man, and that was a 36-year sentence. So immediately I woke up, but it was too late. I was on a bus to prison, and that's where I woke up, in a maximum security prison filled with the most violent offenders who commit the most heinous crimes. And I was there because I had a long sentence, not because my crime was extremely heinous. But if you have a certain length of time, you're going there no matter what. And so, luckily I was protected until I was 18. I was on a protected unit. But at 18 years old, I woke up on my birthday, went out to breakfast, and I sat down and I ate my breakfast surrounded by serial killers and sexual violent predators. People who were never going to go home, people with hundreds of years. The most heinous people were there. That's where we send them, to never see them again. And because I had a long sentence, I unfortunately had to wake up there every morning and eat breakfast around those people. Try to smile, try to keep my hope alive. And unfortunately, that's the condition of the majority of prisoners who wake up in our institutions. They're not good places. We don't necessarily intend for them to be good places of punishment. But most people there don't ever decide to change their lives. They end up lost, as I was as a kid, and they never recover. And I'd say that one of the reasons that they never recover is a grand misunderstanding in their own potential. Oftentimes when I met somebody in prison, they didn't care about themselves at all. Maybe they didn't even shower, every 3 days. They didn't keep up appearances. They didn't care about the way that they spoke. They had just let basically everything go. And they were just wasting their time. And now I refuse to do that. I had to find a way out of my ignorance. The last grade that I completed before going to prison was 7th. I was kicked out of 8th grade. I spent the very end of it in alternative school. 9th grade, I spent the entire year locked up. And it was in 10th grade that I was arrested and sent on to prison. So with a 7th grade education, I had to begin to rebuild my life from one of the darkest holes that we can imagine in our country. And I did just that. But it began with the idea that we are great. We are exceptional beings. That we can do magnificent things. This idea got into my head as I'm sitting there locked in my cell. Can't change anything in the world. Can't even change anything in the cell itself. It's steel and brick. And I said, man, look at this beautiful world we're in. Look at all the potential, everything that people do in this world. Why can't I do it? Right? If they can do it, surely I can do it. right? They're just a man like me. And so I said, well, then, I just gotta work hard. I gotta work harder. And just that seed of an idea is what began me on my path to build my life back better. From one book to the next, from one vocab card that I didn't know to the next, till I had 1,000 vocab cards that I had worked through, until I had learned Koine Greek, until I had published 2 papers and worked on a 3rd, until my art had been featured in 2 different art shows while incarcerated. I kept climbing, and I kept climbing, until finally I was released, and I went back to college, and I graduated with my bachelor's degree. But not only did I graduate, I had striven so hard. I had believed in this idea so much, this idea that I was great, and I was equal to anyone else out there. And my effort could equal anything that their effort equaled. I believed it. Now, you could be the judge of whether or not it's true. But you see where I came from. And you see how far that idea got me. Anything in the world, you can create. If you see it, you can create it. This whole building, this projector, this microphone, the chairs you're in, all started in the mind of somebody. Everything here, everything you see was an idea. You have them all the time. The only difference, though, especially when you're young, is that oftentimes we let go of our ideas. We have it, and then we're like, oh, okay. We're kind of spacey, we're kind of flighty, we're running around. But all you have to do is seize on that idea. Maybe it's a passion, maybe it's a hobby. Seize it and don't let it go. Pursue it until you have accomplished it. Whether it's designing a projector, building a building, it all starts in your head as a single idea. The difference between these inventors and us is that they chased it. They sat down with a piece of paper, a pen, a sketch pad, and they just kept fighting at it. They kept basically pulling it out of nothing, developing it straight out of their head from a single small idea. It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger until you had the architectural plans for this beautiful school down. And it all started in one person's mind when they said, I want to build a new school. And then they never let that idea go until it was accomplished. That is probably the most valuable lesson that I learned in life. You could sum it up saying consistency. You have to be consistent. I can promise every one of you, whatever you want in life, you can go get it. As long as you decide not to give it up. Sometimes it'll take 5 years, sometimes it'll take 10, sometimes it'll take 30. That seems like a long time. When you're 15, when you're 20, when you're 30 or 40, making that investment. Here I stand at 31 years old. I could have been doing something for the last 13 years. It only takes 10 to be a master at it. For the last 10 years, I could have been going to college. Wouldn't have had to pay any of my student loans until I got out with a doctorate. And then as a doctor, I could pay down my student loans. But I could have got there the whole time, working on debt, come out of college with a doctorate. You could be a neurologist, you could be an aero engineer, you name it. Money's not an option. If you want to do it, you can go to school to do it. You don't have to pay for a loan until you're done going to school. And that means if you go to school for 10 years, those loans will add up. And when you think about it at 18 and you think about, oh, that's a lot of money, it's going to cost a lot, maybe, my parents can afford it. As long as you go to school, nobody has to pay for the loans. And if you go to school for something that you're passionate about, something that's real and it's honest, it will pay itself back in the long run. So again, I tell you, you can be whatever you want to be. Don't that kid up there. Whatever you want to be, hold on to it. It's your dream. It's your vision. It's where you can find your path in life. Since getting out of prison, which was roughly about 3 years ago, I was released. Not 50. So I was given 36 years, and I ended up serving 13 before graciously being released early for all that I had done. The court and the prosecutor, they saw my accomplishments and all the hard work I put in, and thankfully they let me out early. So I've been out for about 3 years now, and I hit the ground running. You know, I'm a man who just served 13 years, basically, you know, the majority of my life in prison. I got out, I started a nonprofit, I became a public speaker. I've spoken all over America, all over Indiana. I've spoken at colleges, universities, national conferences. I've spoken overseas. I've traveled from Italy to the UK. I've been across America 3 times by car. You know, I run a nonprofit called Invested Youth, which is sort of a speakers bureau, in where I try to make myself available to share this story, but then also others sort of coming out of incarceration. Because even though people have been sent to prison, when they get out, they still have a value, they still have a voice in helping others understand this plight, you know, understanding this sort of vice that as a community, as collective humanity, we suffer from, just criminality. There's something that is living within our communities, maybe even within our minds, that pressures us to do the wrong thing, to make the wrong decision. You know, bad things are most extremely attractive. They have this allure. You have to really fight. And make no mistake, you have to fight it. You know, I want you to understand these things as if I'm telling you there is an enemy that you're fighting. It is almost like it's your lower self. It's that part of you that wants to just sit down when things get tough. That wants to kind of like shrink to the back of the class when they ask for hands. You know, that part of you that doesn't want to stand up. That doesn't want to like just jump at the forefront and say, okay, let's do it. Let's create. Let's get it done. You know, what's the problem for the day? No, there's another piece that's like, oh, you know, that's not my lane, or we'll let Sammy go, or I'll let Joe go, or, you know, or maybe I'm too shy, maybe I'm a bit nervous. That's the person you have to fight. That's the person that's going to kill your dreams. That's going to tell you, yeah, you know what? Maybe that's not for you. Maybe that's not your passion. You know, maybe you should probably just go get a job down here. You know, they pay all right. That's the voice you have to fight to be great. Because all of you are great. All of us are. But it's a harsh reality that most people don't find their greatness. That the inner light that I see shining so brightly from all of you, sometimes it is shaded by the rest of the world, by the duties we have as adults, to get a job, to pay bills, to sort of keep up with the family. So fight. Fight as hard as you can, for as long as you can, to be as great as you can. Because you deserve it. You deserve everything. If you want to live on a beach in a mansion, you deserve it. If you want 100 acres in the woods, in a cabin, you deserve it. And you can get it. I swear to God, you can get it. Just hold on to the thing that you love for dear life and chase it all the way out. And it'll love you back. If you show that commitment to something in your life will change. Your magnetism will change. The people that are drawn to you, they will share that same energy. They will help you as you help them. But it's an idea, and you just can't let it go. Thank you.